Against better judgment, I decided to buy a Nintendo Switch a few weeks back because, discounting Super Mario Odyssey, which I would have eventually bought the system to play, I was really interested in picking up Splatoon 2. Having paid about $470 for the damn thing, that's exactly what I set out to do. Play Splatoon 2, and I played a lot of it, well over 30 hours in fact. I had a vague sense of what I wanted to discuss in this critique about a week ago, but I opted to hold off until the first Splatfest. Now that it's come and gone, it's finally time to analyze this game as it launched in depth. Pull up a chair, even though you're probably already sitting in one, in which case, I don't know, use it for a footstool. We're gonna be here for a while. The original Splatoon, released on the Wii U in 2015, was a game I ended up enjoying far more than I had anticipated. If I'm being perfectly honest, I thought it looked kinda shit when it was first announced, but the game ended up becoming a surprise hit. It sold very well, considering it was a new IP on a struggling console. I like to compare Splatoon to Titanfall, since I think both games share key similarities as far as their place in the ever-expanding multiplayer shooter genre. Both games had a unique and innovative gameplay hook, but they also suffered from a lack of content and gameplay variety. Something I could partially excuse given that both games were doing something new. Coming into Splatoon 2, the excuse of, well, they were trying something new could no longer be applied. Splatoon had already been released into the wild, and unique gameplay alone wouldn't be enough to carry a sequel. Splatoon 2 would ultimately have to stand on its own as a fully featured package, refining the original's core gameplay loop while offering enough new content to warrant its own existence. With that in mind, did Splatoon 2 achieve this feat? That's what I seek to discover with this critique. I mean, I obviously know what my answer to the question is, but I'm not going to tell you that yet, otherwise you'd click off the video. Before we get started, I'd like to preface the review by stating something that I think will be important to understand as a viewer of this video. My aim with the review is to evaluate Splatoon 2 on its own merits instead of constantly comparing it to the previous game. I realize I just spent the last minute discussing the original game, but that was purely for the sake of context. I'm looking at Splatoon 2 as a standalone product, and frankly, it's been too long since I played Splatoon for me to accurately compare the two titles in depth. It would also be redundant as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't take a super sleuth to figure out that Splatoon 2 is an iterative sequel. I'm not going to tell you, no, it's actually a very different game, because it's not. It's extremely similar. If you didn't enjoy Splatoon, you won't enjoy Splatoon 2. But I doubt you clicked on this video to listen to me bore the shit out of you. Let's dive into this game in depth. You see what I did there? And yes, I know, puns are the lowest form of comedy. Sue me. Splatoon 2 is set in an extremely vibrant, colourful, and charming world populated by Inklings, Octolings, and a variety of different anthropomorphized sea creatures. For a series with such a wacky premise, Splatoon's universe feels very well realised. There's a sense of persistence to the world, that it's a living, breathing place that continues to turn even in the player's absence. In Coppola Square, Splatoon 2's hub area serves to contextualize every aspect of the game, from the stores with unique vendors where you buy items and weapons, to the battle lobby which allows you to find matches. The experience feels seamless, relying little on bland menus while taking every opportunity to interject personality into the experience. The game's distinctive 90s aesthetic stands out among Nintendo's library of games, propped up by some really great character and environmental design. As far as characters go, my favorite has to be Krusty Sean. I mean, he's literally a crumbed prawn in a baseball cap. If the game didn't have good graphics, it wouldn't really hurt the experience since the art style pops so much, but even that's not the case. Not only is the art style great, but from a technical standpoint, Splatoon 2 is a good-looking game. Obviously, it's not Uncharted 4 levels of good, but it certainly doesn't come across as dated. With regards to performance, I'm going to make a point of this because excellent technical performance is something that always deserves praise. I'm the kind of asshole who gets really annoyed when I hear somebody say, the game runs at a smooth 30 FPS. Like that makes any sense. Smooth and 30 FPS don't belong in the same sentence in much the same way as good and Transformers 4. I'm not going to harp on about why a game's frame rate matters and is by no means a trivial aspect of a game. Several other content creators have thoroughly covered that topic. What I will say about Splatoon 2 is that I respect the hell out of it for achieving an unwavering 60 frames per second. It runs brilliantly and Nintendo deserves props for that. But even with the preceding praise in mind, a golden polished turd turd rotating in a microwave filmed at 60 FPS is ultimately just a smoother looking golden polished turd. Great visuals and performance mean very little if the core gameplay doesn't entertain. I'm really proud of this segue, by the way. Splatoon 2 is a multiplayer game. I doubt that came as much of a surprise given that the multiplayer lobby is accessed by the prominent tower in the center of the hub. While single player is a relevant component of Splatoon 2, I'm going to spend most of the review analyzing the game's multiplayer. If you don't like that, then I'm not sure what to say. Sorry, I guess. Splatoon 2 features 4 competitive multiplayer game modes: Turf War, Splat Zones, Rainmaker, and Tower Control, of which Turf War is only playable in regular battle, while the latter 3 are only accessible in ranked battle. Seeing as you have to play several rounds of regular battle in order to unlock the ranked game modes, it seems fitting to start the analysis with Turf War. Turf War is the main multiplayer game mode in Splatoon, in much the same way as Conquest in the Battlefield series. The objective of Turf War is to cover as much of the map as possible in your team's ink within 3 minutes. The team that covers the most turf wins the game. Turf War is probably the most unique game mode in Splatoon 2. It's not a traditional objective-based game mode like the ones you would find in Overwatch or Rainbow Six Siege, but it's not team deathmatch either. You'd be hard pressed to find any other shooter with a vaguely similar mode, and as an introduction to the unique gameplay mechanics and design of Splatoon as a series, it serves that purpose very well. It's highly accessible and the matches are fast paced. Every Splatoon 2 map is designed to be playable in each game mode, but it's pretty clear that first and foremost, all of them were designed to play well in Turf War. Maps are symmetrical, preventing one team from gaining an unfair advantage, and all of the maps contain areas inaccessible by each team, preventing the possibility of spawn camping or a complete blowout. While the game mode can occasionally become boring since you'll sometimes have to scout around your team's spawn to ensure that the area has been properly covered, Turf War is a largely fun game mode, and one that is consistently enjoyable to hop into and play for a few rounds. That said, although I find Turf War to be enjoyable, I think that it's fundamentally flawed in a way that can't necessarily be fixed. In basically every other shooter ever made, regardless of the game mode, you only shoot when you see another player, unless you enjoy putting bullet holes in walls. I mean, there are exceptions like suppressing fire or luring a player by revealing your position or destroying the terrain, but you aren't constantly pulling the trigger. It's pointless. In Turf War, you shoot all the time because that's how you win. Turf War is not a complex game mode. There's really no strategy to it besides constantly shoot or spam grenades. That's all you can do. That's what you're supposed to do. Cover as much of the map as possible in ink while shooting other players before they shoot you. Tactics? There are no tactics. Discounting the most basic, rudimentary of shooter strategies and maneuvers, which comfortably fall under the no fucking shit category. There are a few specific ways in which you will want to play the mode. First off, you're going to want to cover as much of your team's spawn in ink, since it's completely inaccessible to the other team. Failing to do so almost certainly guarantees a loss. Outflanking the other team and pushing deeper into their territory, especially in the last minute of play, is also highly advised. Aside from killing other players and taking advantage of the spawn time, that's basically the best you can do. Most multiplayer maps in shooters feature choke points where the level designers intend for action to be focused. For example, Call of Duty maps of old relied on the 3-path system to funnel players towards each other, and it worked fantastically until Ghost fucked it up. Don't get me wrong, Splatoon 2's maps do have a sense of flow. The levels are designed to concentrate fighting in the center of the map, but because you don't stand to gain that much from splatting other players, you're not necessarily going to hold choke points or valuable areas. Holding areas in general doesn't help that much. You need to keep the pressure up and cover as much turf as possible. In the case of Turf War, the issue is exacerbated by the fact that the game mode doesn't really take advantage of the unique aspects of Splatoon's gameplay and level design. A lot of what makes Splatoon unique is how you traverse the levels. Shooting a path of ink and swimming through it is fast, but in squid form you completely fall through meshes, and certain walls can't be inked. In the ranked game modes, these variables in the level design really feel emphasized because getting to the objective quickly is important, and the meshes and walls throw a wrench into the mix, placing a high value on on unobstructed, quick travel paths, which vary from map to map. Turf War doesn't achieve this to the same extent because paths don't matter all that much. You want to cover everything anyway instead of creating a specific path for your teammates. This is made worse by the fact that the broad map selection isn't as diverse as most multiplayer games. In the likes of Halo, even if you're playing Team Slayer, the variety of maps ensures each match plays differently. Team Slayer on Valhalla or Last Resort relies more heavily on vehicles and long-range weaponry, whereas Lockout is mid-range oriented and Warlock is close quarters. There are no close quarters maps in Splatoon 2, they're all mid-ranged. Objectives mix things up, but Turf War has no such luxury. Turf War doesn't really accommodate for different styles of play. If one of your team members isn't constantly trying to cover enemy ink, you'll lose. You have to move, which means there's only one mode of play in Turf War: move and shoot all the time. It's for this reason that Turf War is my least favorite game mode. Don't mistake my criticism for complete scathing. I like the mode, and in short doses, it's a lot of fun, but it has the depth of a hydrogen atom, and I think forcing people to reach level 10 before they can access the other game modes is kinda stupid. Speaking of other game modes, man, am I on fire with these segues. Splat Zones, Rainmaker, and Tower Control, Splatoon 2's other competitive multiplayer game modes, are only accessible through the Ranked Battle, where your wins and losses affect your grade. Ranked Battle modes operate on a rotation, so only one of the 3 modes is accessible at any one time, with the modes and maps changing every 2 hours across all modes. Not a huge fan of this, which is kind of a problem when the whole game operates on a rotation. Yeah, probably ought to make this clear. Splatoon 2's multiplayer content is all operated on a timetable of rotation. You can't play on any map or any game mode whenever you want. In regular, ranked, and league battle, only 2 maps are playable at a time, and in the case of ranked and league battle, only one of the 3 modes is available, changing with each map rotation. All 3 aren't available at the same time. If this is a big deal to you, then don't buy the game. As I said, this is how it works. Splat Zones is basically Splatoon's version of King of the Hill and sees 2 teams competing to hold either 1 or 2 splat zones in the center of the map, doing so by ensuring the majority of the zone's surface area is covered in your team's ink. In this game mode, there's far more reason to have players positioned in different locations so as to prevent the other team from even reaching the splat zone. For example, you may want to have somebody on an elevated position firing at incoming enemies while your other team members stay in the zone covering ink as it lands. The winning and losing teams can flip on a dime, and it's constantly tense because you're battling for a specific zone. The action is highly focused, and against a well-coordinated team, securing a splat zone can become very challenging. However, one of the problems this game mode suffers from is grenade spam, and this is something I'll address later on when discussing weapon balancing. Because of the location of the splat zones, the team that ends up winning early on usually wins. Unlike the other 2 game modes, where the closer you get to winning means the further the objective is from spawn, the splat zones are in the same place. You die, you have to respawn, and then travel all the way back to the splat zones when your team is already losing. In other game modes, the losing team gets the upper hand because the objective is moving closer to their spawn. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the game's spawn, splat zones can't really change throughout the match, which in my opinion would increase the mode's replay value. At the same time, the mode itself is balanced from a map design standpoint, and in that respect, there's not a whole lot that can be done to address that issue. Rainmaker is Splatoon's equivalent of Capture the Flag. In this mode, the objective is to capture a powerful weapon and transport it to the enemy team's spawn. The Rainmaker fires a powerful charge that explodes when fired and also creates an ink trail to swim through. Every time the weapon is dropped, the 2 teams have to shoot at its protective shield to unlock it. When enough damage from one team is dealt to the protective barrier, it explodes in that team's ink, killing nearby enemies. Rainmaker is probably the most well-balanced game mode in Splatoon 2. Ignoring the symmetry of the maps, which applies to all of the game modes, grenade spam in Rainmaker is an ineffective strategy because there isn't a specific area that needs to be covered in ink to win. Shooting is more effective than spamming grenades. There's also an element of strategy because creating an unobstructed path for the player holding the Rainmaker is key to success. If a team works well, they can get the Rainmaker to the enemy team's point in a matter of seconds. However, most matches end up becoming an intense tug of war where teams constantly gain and lose control of the weapon in various parts of the map. Speed is vital in this game mode since the player carrying the Rainmaker is vulnerable to close close range attacks. Rainmaker is great, and I find myself thoroughly enjoying it every time it comes up in the ranked battle rotation. The game's final competitive multiplayer mode, Tower Control, is about holding onto a mobile objective and moving it towards the enemy team's spawn. During the move, the objective stops at checkpoints where you have to hold the tower for a few seconds before moving on, after which the checkpoint disappears. This means that when you lose control of the tower, getting it back to where you had it before is easier. It's a mode that rewards teams for applying concentrated pressure, whether they're holding the point or trying to remove enemies from it. For me, by comparison to the rest of the ranked battle modes, Tower Control roughly falls in the middle. The dynamic nature of the mode is what I find most entertaining, but at the same time, in order to progress, you have to sit on top of the tower as it moves, which can sometimes be boring. You'll be completely exposed to enemies on it too, especially in maps where the tower moves below vantage points. It's still ridiculously fun though. However, I think it's important to spend some time on a subject that has an immense impact on the entertainment value of Splatoon 2's multiplayer game modes. It's something I feel is crucially important and cannot be overlooked. This is a topic I want to spend some time on because I've noticed a lack of discussion regarding weapon balance in a lot of reviews for this game. I have no idea why. Your review doesn't have to be only 5 minutes. You can spend more time discussing this aspect of the game thoroughly. I think it's really important. Balancing can make or break a multiplayer game. Splatoon 2's balancing is pretty good. I will say that. It's pretty good. As I said before, all of the maps are symmetrical, so purely from a level design standpoint, the maps are totally balanced. On the other hand, weapon balancing is, well, allow me to explain. There are currently 6 different weapon types in Splatoon 2, with a 7th coming in the future. They are as follows: shooters, which are more or less fully automatic or semi-automatic rifles; rollers, which includes the splat, roller, and the ink brush; chargers, basically sniper rifles; sloshers, which are self-explanatory; splattings, which are chain guns; and the dualies. Each weapon class is distinct, having both benefits and drawbacks. They're all functionally different from one another, which I really appreciate, and even within their respective classes, there are a lot of differences in range, damage, and firing rate. Dualies are not even remotely similar to splat rollers. Sloshers are completely different to blasters. You see what I'm getting at? It's a pretty good selection. The same very much applies to sub-weapons and the specials. Most sub-weapons are grenades, but again, they're all functionally different. There are standard bombs that explode after a few seconds, ones that explode on impact, sticky grenades, player-seeking grenades, mines, toxic ink clouds. You get the idea. Lots of different sub-weapons. Before we get back to the primary and sub-weapon balancing, let's cover the specials. The specials are not well balanced, in my opinion. There are several different specials that act similarly to ultimates in games like Overwatch. You basically get a really powerful ability for 5 to 10 seconds. Now, to be fair, most games don't have balanced specials. The only game I can think of where the specials were well balanced is Titanfall 2. And Splatoon 2 is hardly the worst offender. My issue with the specials is that a few are too powerful and a few are utterly useless. I think the splashdown is way too powerful because dodging it is tricky and outright ending it before it occurs is virtually impossible because of how short the charge is. With the splashdown, you jump into the air, stay there for a split second, and slam down, throwing a whole bunch of ink in the designated area while killing any dudes nearby. You can probably tell where I'm going with this. Unlike the ink jet, which is super easy to counter by simply looking up and shooting at the dude hovering in the air, the splashdown is fast and effective. In certain game modes, it's flat out unfair. For example, on Tower Control, it's the best super, bar none. Instant objective kill, it's overpowered. The grenade spam specials don't even come close in that regard. However, the grenade spam specials are really good in splat zones because they clear everybody off the objective and cover heaps of turf. Meanwhile, I see barely anybody using the high beam ink because it's sluggish as shit, and being able to shoot through walls is useless if you can't see what's on the other side. Same goes for the ink storm. It doesn't really kill anybody, it just sort of ruins movement paths. The tenter missiles and ink armor are the only specials I find to be well balanced throughout. They're usually easy to avoid or counter, but they have valuable uses in all game modes. So the specials aren't balanced. They aren't. The splashdown, bomb launcher, and ink armor are highly effective, while the ink jet is easily countered and the stingray and ink storm are fucking useless. There are 7 specials currently in the game and 2 of them are shit. That's not well balanced. The issue with the weapons is something of a more complex problem in my opinion, but I'm not exactly sure if there's a fix to it. The issue with the weapon balancing right now is that some weapons are useful in every game mode and some are only useful in certain game modes. In Turf War, the objective is to cover as much of the map as possible in ink, so the most useful weapons in this mode are the ones that can cover a large surface area in ink very quickly. So basically, the automatic weapons, the roller, and the slosher are the best weapons in Turf War. That ink brush? Absolutely not. It's good at dealing damage in a specific area, not covering turf. And the Splat Charger? No fucking way. The Splat Charger is kind of a worthless weapon, and it shows in the fact that hardly any people are using it. It has all of the drawbacks of a single shot weapon without the real advantages. Sniper rifles are very much risk-reward weapons. Because it's not rapid fire, you have to actually hit your target directly rather than fire in their general direction. But while it's not rapid fire, as soon as the enemy lines up in your crosshairs, you pull the trigger and they're dead. The Splat Charger does just that. It charges. You have to charge your shots before you shoot, and once the weapon is fully charged, you move about as fast as a lion at a government department building. You're completely exposed, and the weapon is so pitiful when it isn't charged that as soon as somebody is in range, you're dead. The Splat Charger is basically a railgun without the splash damage. I get why it was made this way. If there was a weapon that could fire high damage rounds from a long distance with no charge, it'd be the best weapon in the game. I'm just saying the weapon as it is now is useless in my humble opinion because of the charge. And in a game mode like Turf War, forget about it. It doesn't cover turf like the splatter shot does. In fact, if I were to list the weapons most frequently used in multiplayer, there would have to be variants of the splatter shot, splat dually, splat roller, and the slosher. I never played a team where one of those weapons wasn't being used. To summarize, the issue with the weapon balancing is that certain weapons are great in every mode, while others are only useful in some modes, and some are flat out worthless in every mode, in the sense that there's always another weapon that does everything that gun can do better. Again, to be fair, this isn't an issue exclusive to Splatoon 2. Most shooters feature a weapon in each class that's flat out better than everything else. Modern Warfare 2 had the ACR, Battlefield 3 had the AN-94, Titanfall had the R101C. I get it, some guns just end up being better, but that doesn't mean the issue should be overlooked. Probably ought to talk about this game mode. Splatoon 2 is a multiplayer game, but even still, I'm of the opinion that all games should come with some kind of single player component because eventually the servers shut down. Splatoon's campaign was alright, but I couldn't describe to you any of the levels like I could for a game like Halo 3. Splatoon 2 safely falls under the same category as the original, even though it has more gameplay variety. As far as shooter campaigns go, Splatoon 2 single player is good. It's fun, and it introduces players to the game's weapons very well, but it really isn't that good. The story of the campaign is pretty straightforward. Basically, the Octolings are the bad guys and they stole the great Zapfish from Inkopolis Square. Marie, one of the two Squid sisters from the original game, ropes the player into helping her get the Zapfish and find her missing sister Callie. Yeah, it's not exactly high art. There are 27 levels and 5 bosses in the campaign, which roughly take a few minutes each to complete. The single player is quite short. It won't take you any longer than 5 hours, especially if you end up like me and rarely fail any of the levels. I think I only ever got 3 or 4 game over screens since the campaign is incredibly lenient with lives. You get a maximum of 3 lives, but every time you hit a checkpoint, which are plentiful, you regain a life. If you die once, and I emphasize the if because I didn't start dying until the last sector, you won't get many game over states. It's not a hard campaign. It was fun, I certainly enjoyed playing through it, but I don't really see the need to play it again. The levels are incredibly linear. The only freedom provided is seen in combat areas, but that can be said for pretty much every shooter ever made. I don't recall any levels that I would consider bad, but none of them were particularly impressive. It's all fine, it's not a bad campaign by any means, and the fact that the story doesn't take itself seriously means it doesn't come across as pretentious, like other highly lauded shooter campaigns. Bioshock, give it a But I don't see myself ever replaying the campaign. I simply have no desire to do that. The story is fine, the levels are serviceable, and the gameplay is still enjoyable, but it doesn't really demand a second playthrough, because it still feels like a 5-hour tutorial. I'm not the biggest fan of horde-based co-op modes in shooters. They certainly have a place in the genre, and I'm glad so many people can extract a lot of fun from them, but I feel that they're usually way too slow to start and require too much of a time commitment to be fun. Many of them aren't very dynamic either, so there's that. I see the appeal, but honestly, I find Call of Duty Zombies to be about as enjoyable as sleeping on a bed of rusty screwdrivers. It's for those reasons that Salmon Run stands out as really damn good. Even better than that, Salmon Run is legitimately fantastic. The primary objective in Salmon Run is to fight off a horde of salmonoids while collecting golden eggs dropped by the boss salmonoids. To progress to the next round, besides ensuring you all survive the round, you need to collect a certain number of golden eggs. There are 3 rounds in which you have to face an increasing number of salmonoids. Make it through all 3 rounds and you get a lot of points, which leads to acquiring a bonus and getting paid more as you progress through the ranks. Lose and your pay grade decreases. Salmon Run only features 2 maps, which you would think is not nearly enough, but the game mode remains exciting and fresh due to the dynamic nature of the mode. In Salmon Run, the terrain will often shift. The tide will go out, revealing more of the map, or it will recede, limiting players to only a small section of the map. The collection basket for the eggs may also change at spawn. Each round will entail a different challenge too. Sometimes fog will roll in, limiting your view range. At night, you'll be bombarded with extremely aggressive enemies. Some rounds see turret spawn, which you'll need to use to fend off huge enemies. This is what I really enjoy about the mode. Because there's an objective beyond, hey, don't get your ass killed, combined with the time limit, it makes the game mode hectic. Sometimes you have to risk venturing into dangerous territory to ensure you actually secure enough eggs to get to the next round. It's incredibly tense. Salmon Run is honestly the most fun I've had in a multiplayer game for a while. It's great, and every time it comes up, I hop on. You're probably wondering why I said every time it comes up. Yeah, remember that rotation shit I mentioned? Salmon Run is only playable at specific times on certain days. Unlike the main modes, which cycle through maps, but are always playable, Salmon Run is limited access, so you can't just play whenever you want. There are days when it just never opens at all. I know, fucking stupid. I've heard the justifications and I can see a modicum of reason behind the choice. By only allowing people to play Salmon Run at certain times, it should theoretically guarantee that players will be on every time when it's available. It ensures the player population doesn't get too low. I understand that, but really, limited access game modes serve no purpose. You're borrowing content when the player base is large enough that it should always be populated. Just let me play the damn mode whenever I want. This is more of that Nintendo doesn't know what they're doing thing, which can become very aggravating. The value of a multiplayer game often rests on the amount of content included. Doesn't matter how fun a game is if there are only 2 maps. Eventually, you'll get bored. It's an important factor, and in Splatoon 2's case, my satisfaction with the amount of content on offer is mixed. In terms of playable content, Splatoon 2 has 8 multiplayer maps, 2 co-op maps, a 5-hour campaign, and 4 game modes. That's it. It has a lot of weapons and clothing items, but the latter fall into what I like to call the skill tree category, where their role is to basically buff the player in an extremely technical manner, like faster respawns or a shorter ink collection time. In terms of the environments, 8 maps isn't really all that much, especially when 2 of them are remakes of maps from Splatoon. That's just fucking lazy. The issue is exacerbated by the fact that they can all be safely categorized as mid-range maps like I explained before. Don't get me wrong, the maps are designed extremely well and they're varied, but it's still just 8 maps. That said, the lack of content isn't such a big deal because Splatoon 2 will have free DLC like the first game. Over time, new maps and weapons will be added, slowly buffing the game's content. And again, it's free, so you can't complain. In fact, I think that deserves a lot of commendation. The real success of Splatoon 2 can be found in the consistent quality of the content on offer. None of the content is bad or poorly made. It's all good, and that's something we as gamers can easily overlook. I'm sure a lot of people think it's basically the same game as before, and in a lot of ways it is, but it's still consistently good. There were rarely times when I wasn't enjoying the game. Splatoon 2 is flawed, but most of the flaws have a silver lining. The amount of content on offer is lacking, but that will certainly be improved over time with the free DLC. Turf War is shallow, but once you reach level 10, you don't have to play it anymore. Some of the weapons strike me as not especially useful, but that can change with balancing, and the addition of new weapon classes will mix up the gameplay. Very few aspects of the game strike me as flat out retarded, if you get what I mean. Making it to where you can't play on any map at any time has no real justification other than I like it because reasons. It's dumb, in my opinion. Same goes for the lacking voice chat features, even if I personally don't like using voice chat. What Splatoon 2 achieves and deserves credit for is refinement. In almost every respect, Splatoon 2 improves on its predecessor, refining its mechanics to a T. It is a superior game. The campaign has a clearer focus, there are more weapons to play with, Salmon Run is a great addition, and the multiplayer is still just as fun as the last time around. Splatoon 2 is in a very unique and unfortunate position. While it's consistently good, it doesn't do anything exceptionally well. Titanfall 2 has better gunplay and a stronger single-player campaign. Battlefield looks better and has more content. Halo has a better story and universe. But I think the ultimate mistake in judging this game would be to assume that it's not a good package because no one aspect of the game soars as high as other games in the genre. Splatoon 2 is unique. There's nothing like it, and it does a lot right. It's not perfect, and it's not exceptional, but Splatoon 2 is a damn good game.